So if you think about my early success as a chess player, it was not anything close to smooth sailing. What led to my winning my first big championship wasn't talent, but hard work and a get back on the horse mentality. I lost a heartbreaker, came back, got in big trouble again, and managed to save my neck by digging deep. This is a pattern which is repeated over and over in my life. Losses lead to wins. Pain leads to strength. A bad position, a mistake, leads to a creative save that wins the day. As you play chess, or do anything else vaguely competitive for that matter, it's absolutely critical to internalize a relationship to the learning process that allows you to rebound from setbacks, as opposed to being shattered. How can we do this? In my book, I confront this issue in depth, with the help of some critical psychological studies, and I strongly encourage you to read that material in Chapter 3 carefully. The way I want to look at the issue in this course is through the lens of perfection. This is a word that is thrown around all the time. The perfect game, the perfect smile, the perfect artist, the perfect body. To my mind, there is no more paralyzing notion than perfection. Because we're human, we make mistakes, and most of our greatest creations come out of the improvised reaction to a situation gone awry. To be honest, I think that loss to David Arnett in the last round of my first national championship was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. If I had won without suffering for it, I may have fallen into the trap of relying on my talent to carry me through in life. I've seen many brilliant people stuck in this paralyzing mentality. As my grandmother always told me, talent is cheap. If we rely on it, our ride will be short, brittle, and disappointing. After that early journey of flying high, crashing, lifting myself out of the mud and climbing to the top, I felt free to embrace the battle of chess. I wasn't looking for quick, painless wins or to avoid hard work. It was the escalation of intensity, the slugfest of ideas, the shifts in momentum, the feeling of pushing myself to the limit that got me all fired up. Now I was truly loving the game. I believe this organic, human relationship to competition and learning was a large reason I was able to be so successful in the years to come. This is a game against a very talented and dangerous rival of mine named Michael Gran. For some reason, whenever Michael and I played, he had the white pieces and attacked me right off the bat. He had an incredibly fierce and sophisticated opening repertoire, and so I often came out of the opening in a bit of trouble. It's easy to get dispirited in this type of situation. You sit down and are hurting right off the bat. You've already seen me in this kind of situation against Dave Arnett and against Jeff Sauer. When this happens, you have to stay cool, think on your feet, work your way out of the jam one step at a time. Michael and I were in the National Junior High School Championships. I actually show this position in my first book, Attacking Chess. Once again, I'm on the ropes. Michael seems to have a huge advantage, but I made a deep calculation and found a way out. Okay, here my position is bad, borderline desperate. What can I do? White has a deeply advanced e-pawn, which is like a bone in my throat. His queen on e5 is in a great position. My bishop on f5 is pinned. It can't move because my queen will come under attack. His knight on c5 is in a fantastic outpost, and he's looking to jump into the d7 square. His rook on f1 is piled up on the bishop on f5, which is barely defended enough by my rook on f8 and queen on g5. I can't move my rook on e7 because his e6 pawn will advance. My position is teetering, just on the edge. Basically, for a few moves now, I've based my defense around the idea of playing rook f6. Calculate. Let me know what you think. Once again, think about the psychology of the situation. We're in a critical round of a national championship face-off, and I'm on the ropes. My opponent thinks he has me. His coach was running around the playing hall pumping his fists. I have to see one move deeper. Can I play rook f6? Take your time and tell me what you think. As you can probably guess, I decided yes. Rook f6. This had been my intention for some time now. I did a deep calculation. Rook f6, and he played knight d7. In this type of situation, for example in this position here, we have to have a calm, steady state of mind. Think deeply, calculate. Look at what your opponent has in mind. Figure out the variations that he's counting on. And often it'll be a quiet move in the middle of the craziness that'll be the opportunity. He's attacking my rook on f6. If I move, for example, to g6, what does he do? Should white play rook takes f5? No, this would be a big mistake, because now the g2 square is threatened. Queen takes g2 checkmate. The first question you ask yourself every time someone makes a move is, why did he do that? What is his threat? After rook g6, white should play a quiet move. Rook e2. Now the bishop on f5 is under attack, and if it moves, for example, bishop e4, now what should white play? Exactly. Good job. Rook f8 is checkmate. The knight on d7 guards the rook. The king can't move anywhere. It's all over. After knight d7, my whole calculation a few moves ago was based on playing the move rook f takes e6. So now take some time. What does white do here? After rook f takes e6, it may look good for me initially, because, for example, if I go back queen c3, black can play rook takes e1, rook takes e1, and now you have the very strong move bishop to h3, a fantastic attacking move. Now, you're threatening checkmate over here, so if rook takes e7, do you see what black would play? Exactly, queen takes g2 checkmate. After queen takes h3, what should black play here? Exactly, rook takes e1, and we win. If white plays g3 here, then what should we do? Here we can just trade rooks and take on d7. Why don't you take a moment here for white and try to find the key move that my opponent had in mind. We know that moving the queen away is no good. Black will be winning. The knight on d7 will hang. Exactly. Excellent job. This is a very strong attacking move, which my opponent's whole plan was based on. Rook takes f5 threatens my queen, and if I take his queen, you see what he should do? Exactly. Rook f8. A back rank mate. The knight on d7 guards the f8 square, and white wins the game. This is the tactic that he had in mind. But of course I saw that. So we see that we can't take on e5 because of rook f8. Checkmate. Do you see my idea here? Queen takes f5. Excellent. That's the move I had in mind. He played queen takes f5, and now rook takes e1 check, king f2. It's not over yet. In this situation, queen and knight against two rooks. A queen is worth about 9 pawns, a knight is worth about 3 pawns, that's 12. A rook is worth 5. So two rooks are worth about 10 pawns. White is up material here, 12 to 10 if we're thinking about it numerically. You may see that I can play the move rook f7 here, but this would be a big mistake because white can simplify. Queen takes f7 check, king takes f7, king takes e1. Two rooks for the queen are gone. White's left with a knight, winning the game. I can't do that. The skewer doesn't work. You see what my plan was here? The key is for me to check him away from my rook, and then to go after that knight by removing the defender. I played rook check, and he played king g3. If he goes back to g1, what should I do now? Here I have the very strong move, rook f7. You see his king is trapped in the back rank. After rook f7, his queen has to move. And now, what do? Of course, rook e1, checkmate. So his king has to come up, king to g3. If he plays king f3, I can just check him again. If he goes back to f2, I check him again. Now, he's up material. I'm trying to save this game. Remember, I was in huge trouble. If he goes back and forth, it's perpetual check. That's a draw, that's fine. If he plays king f3, rook e3 check, and then king f4, what do we do now? Now we can bring a rook to the e4 square, checking him, and that square is defended by my pawn. Now let's go back. He played king g3, and now I checked him again. Rook 2 to e3 check. He played king h4. Now this was the critical position. We had both calculated to here a long time ago. When I played rook f6, I saw this position. Remember, when you're in trouble, when your opponent has calculated something out, he thinks he has a forced win, the stakes are very high in either direction. When your opponent is on the edge of winning, he's also on the edge of losing the win. It's a funny thing about chess. The tension builds and builds and builds, and there are all these abstract things that happen. But then when the moment of truth comes, when things move from the abstract into the concrete, the game can swing in either direction very quickly. This is a perfect example. Right here, the slightly better calculation can win the day. What did I have in mind? Here I saw that if I played the move rook f7, there's no way for him to keep defending his knight on d7. He can defend his king. For example, if I check him with a move like rook 7 to e4 check, he doesn't have to keep on coming up into danger. He can play a move like g4, blocking the check, and his king is safe. If he plays queen g4, you see what I play? Look for a powerful skewer. Yes, rook e4 wins the game. After rook f7, his queen has nowhere to go. e4 and d3 are covered, e5 and e6 are covered, g6 is covered. If queen g4, we have rook e4, h3 is covered. He has to throw out his knight, knight f6. You see, I've trapped his queen in the middle of the board. This was the key thing to find when I saw that I could play rook f6. After knight f6 check, I played rook takes f6. He has to give up material to open up some space for his queen. He plays queen down to c8 check, king f7, queen takes c7 check, and here we agreed to a draw. If I was playing this game now, I wouldn't have agreed to a draw. I would have kept on fighting, pushing for a win. I like two rooks, but to be honest with you, when I was a kid, I didn't quite realize how strong two rooks are. Two rooks are a little bit better than a queen, but it's hard to coordinate them sometimes, and when I was younger, I was much more comfortable with the power of a queen than the power of two rooks, and in this game I was just 9 years old. So we agreed to a draw in this unclear position where black has slight advantage. Again, objectively, that probably wasn't the best decision for me. So once again, if we compare this game to the last one against Jeff Sauer, we see the importance of a save, calculating deeply, looking one step further than the opponent, having a clear head when we're under pressure. And that can be contrasted, of course, to my first game I showed you against David Arnett, where he threw me a curveball, I got into trouble, and then I fell apart. Over and over in your chess experience, you're going to find yourself in trouble. You have to keep a clear head. Think calmly. When the pressure is on, when he's attacking you, when he's on the edge of winning, that's the moment when you have to think most deeply, with the clearest head possible, and find the right move. Here, I had to find the quiet move, rook f7, the quiet move in the middle of the calculation, in order to play the move rook f6, or to be more honest, to decide that I was going to play rook f6 a few moves before that even. So, you have got to sometimes look for the quiet move, when your opponent is all excited. His heart is pounding too when he thinks he's about to win. It's the change of pace in calculation, which can often expose a hidden wrinkle in the position which catches your opponent off guard. Let's take a look at the next games. I had the black pieces. e4, c5, knight f3, d6, bishop b5 check. This is the Sicilian defense by me. I was aiming for my Dragon Sicilian, which was my favorite opening at the time. He played bishop b5 check. I played bishop d7. He played knight c3. Bishop takes b5. I don't need to make this trade, but against young players at this time, I was so confident in the endgame because my coach Bruce Pandolfini and I studied there that I was always happy to trade down material and head that way, because I knew I could handle the subtleties of the endgame better than my opponents. Bishop takes b5, knight takes b5, knight c6. He castled. I played knight f6, attacking the e-pawn. He defended with d3, g6, fianchettoing the bishop. This is the structure of the Dragon Sicilian as well. This dark square bishop is very good on the long diagonal. He played rook e1, bishop g7, queen e2. Normal development. We're headed to the endgame here. I castled. He played bishop g5. I played a6, knight c3. Now, if I was looking at this position right now as a chess player, I'd play b5, expand on the queen side. My bishop is very good in the long diagonal. But here, I again was headed for the endgame. That was my game plan in this one, and I played the move knight d4. Knight takes d4, c takes d4. Now, from one perspective, I've doubled my pawns, which is negative. That's not really such a bad problem here because, in fact, the open c file makes his c2 pawn a weakness. If his knight moves out of the way, then I can play rook c8, queen c7, pile up on that c2 pawn. So my d4 pawn actually keeps a weakness of his pinned back. The real reason I'm not so crazy about this decision of mine is because I'm blocking off my great bishop on g7. Now, instead of being open on that long diagonal, it's biting into my pawn on d4. But okay. He played knight d5, and I played e6. Obviously, I'm completely content to trade into the endgame here. That's my plan from the beginning. Knight takes f6, bishop takes f6. Bishop takes f6, queen takes f6. He played queen f3. My opponent is also suggesting trades, but for a different reason. He feels that as more pieces come off the board, things will get simpler. The stronger player will usually navigate the subtleties of endgames with a defter touch. I was happy to trade down. Queen takes f3, g takes f3, and e5. So take a look at this position. The pawn structure is very important. I have doubled d-pawns. Now, people usually think of doubled pawns as weaknesses. Sometimes that's true, sometimes it's not. This is a case where it's not. These two pawns are very strong. The d6 pawn strengthens my e5 pawn. My d4 pawn is advanced, and it pins back his c2 pawn, which is a weakness. I want to play rook c8, rook c5, or rook c6, the other rook to c8, and double up. Now, he'll have to use his rooks to defend that c2 pawn. Now, I've got two active rooks. He's got two passive rooks. That's what I want. And the pawn structure, in fact, my doubled pawns, is what allows that kind of dynamic. So don't be dogmatic when you're evaluating pawn structures. Don't just think doubled pawn bad, undoubled pawn good. Sometimes doubled pawns will allow you to have very interesting pressure on the other guy's game. Here, Eric recognized that my plan was to double up on the c-file, and he played c3, offering to undouble my pawns, but he's right. He has to get rid of that weakness. I traded and played rook c8. He played rook c1, defending that pawn, and now I made the decision f5. I could have also played rook c5, looking to double up, or I could have played b5, pinning his pawn down to c3, and then looking to double up on the c-file. These would have been fine. But f5 is based on the principle of two weaknesses. My idea is to trade off these pawns somehow. Now, in doing so, I might have to undouble his f3 pawn. Ultimately, if I open up the f-file, my plan is that I'll have a rook on the open c-file and a rook on the open f-file. Often, when you're converting small advantages in the endgame, the principle of two weaknesses is a very important one to use. If I can play on the king side and on the queen side, going back and forth, ultimately his defenses might crumble. This is an idea to keep in mind, the principle of two weaknesses. He played d4. Eric recognized that I was starting to dominate all of the play, so he wanted to open up the center. I played f takes e4, f takes e4. Rook f3 is a very strong move. I'm attacking this pawn on c3, and the only really good way of defending it is rook to e3. But now if I double his pawns like I did, rook takes e3, f takes e3, we've created a very important dynamic in the pawn structure. You see, I still have this active rook on c8, and his rook is guarding the c3 pawn. But now, down the road, if the rooks somehow come off the board, I have an outside pawn majority. What do I mean by this? Well, let's take the rooks off the board. Let's pretend that both of the kings move over to the queen side. My king comes to b5. It's looking to run up here. He defends it. Maybe he puts his king on b3 somehow. We're in a situation where we have the same amount of pawns, but his doubled e-pawns are matched up by my single e-pawn. And now I have the outside pawn majority. I can play g5, h5, whatever he does, eventually I can make a passed pawn on that side. If his king runs over to defend it, then in this situation, I can then attack the queenside pawns with my king. And his king is overloaded. He can't defend this pawn from queening and defend this pawn. He has to stop the queening pawn. I take this, and all of his pawns will fall apart. I'll make a queen on the queen side and win the game. So the pawn structure that I created is a critical one for converting the endgame. I have what's called the outside pawn majority. Learning how to distinguish these subtleties of pawn structure will be very important for your endgame play. And then later, once you know how to convert those advantages in the endgame, you can aim for them in the middle game and the opening. Make your opponent take small structural weaknesses and then move into the endgame that will help you convert that advantage most intensely. That's a big part of high-level positional chess, navigating pawn structure. So after we traded down on e3, I played the strong move rook c4. This is a typical move of rook endings. And a very important idea in rook endings is activity. My rook is active. His rook is passive, locked down to the defense of the c3 square. Now I also have the idea now of playing rook to a4, going after the a2 pawn. So my rook on c4 here has some very good mobility, and it also locks down his pawn on c3. If it was back on c8, he might be able to play the move c4. Rook c4 stops it. Later I can play b5 and lock that in, so even if he has a king on d3, he can't kick it out. Visualizing 3-4 moves in advance, it's very important in the endgame. We have to see our strategic aim and figure out how to get there. King f2, b5, king e2, and now I made an interesting decision. I played b4. You see, his pawn on c3 is pinned. It can't take on b4, because I would take his rook. Another option for me here would have been to simply play king f7 to e7, maybe even king f7 followed by g5 and h5, expand on the king side. But I made things precise. After b4, He played king d2. I'm threatening this pawn and he has to defend it. B takes c3, rook takes c3. Okay, rook takes c3 would definitely have been an interesting decision, because I have the outside pawn majority. After king takes c3, if I play a move like g5, looking to advance on the king side, his king has to rush over to the king side, and then I could try to play on the queen side. This would have been a good plan for me. I decided to win a pawn instead. Tactically in this position, I have two attackers of the d4 pawn. He has one defender. But of course I can't play pawn takes pawn because you see what white plays here, right? Exactly. Rook takes c4. So what I decided to do was play the move rook to a4. Now I'm threatening the a2 pawn, which would come with check. So if he doesn't defend that pawn, for example, if he plays d takes e5, you see what I do now? Exactly. The in-between move, known in chess as his Zwischenzug. Rook takes a2 check, the in-between move. I take this to a check, and next move, I'll recapture the pawn, and I've won a pawn. He played a3, defending that pawn, and only now e takes d4. This was my calculation when I played b4. I saw I had the tricky move, rook a4, winning a pawn. a3, e takes d4, e takes d4, rook takes d4, check. King e3. Okay, we've gone into the endgame. I messed up his pawn structure. I made an active play with my rook. Then I made a very concrete decision, playing the move b4, which forced tactically the win of a pawn. Now I have to convert the endgame. I played rook back to a4. A good square. You see, this keeps his rook pinned down to the a3 pawn. You can see a certain clarity of expression in my play here. I was a young boy, just 9 years old, but I loved the endgame. I traded into it from the very beginning, allowed trades of pieces. Boom, boom, boom. I made a couple good structural decisions which my opponent didn't quite understand. Then I won a pawn. I'm very confident here. Converting this kind of endgame win, you have to make every move precisely, correctly. You want to be confident, but you don't want to be overconfident. King f4, and now I played d5. This is a very good move, just because it's following the principles of chess. When you're up in material, you want to trade down. I'm up a pawn here. By playing d5, I'm piling up on the e4 square. Of course, you see that his pawn can't recapture because it's pinned to the king. He has to play the move rook e3, and now I can trade down into a king and pawn game whenever I want to. Here I played the move rook takes e4, which, yes, okay, it follows the principles in that it's trading down, but it violates another principle, which is that I didn't have to do this right now. I have time to improve my position a little bit. I could have played, for example, the move king f7. His rook can't move off of the defensive e4. Anywhere his king moves, I can still take on e4. And his pawn can't move because it's pinned to his king. So he's all locked down. If I can make the move king f7, improving my position just a little bit, activating the king into the middle of the board, another very important endgame principle. Then, next move I can take on e4. This would have been better. Improve your position, and then go where you have to go. Anytime you can make a small improvement, do it. Details matter in chess. So I got a little sloppy. I played rook takes e4. This was a mistake. We can see the power of confidence, and we can see the power of overconfidence. Being overconfident can get you sloppy, make you miss the details, and sometimes throw away a big win. He played rook takes e4, d takes e4, king takes e4. In this position, I'm still winning. It's a king and pawn endgame. I have 2 pawns on the king side. He has 1. I have a pawn on the queen side, and so does he. He has somewhat more of an active king. The key to understand is that if he runs to the queen side, I can start pushing my king side pawns. I have to activate my king. So if he stays with me on the king side, eventually my king will bring the struggle to the queen side. If he moves to the queen side, I'll move my king side pawns. Then when he returns to the king side, I'll take his pawn on the queen side. Once again, it's the principle of 2 weaknesses, a very important way of converting an advantage in chess. For some reason in this position, I played h5. A terribly sloppy moment. It gives him a whole new lease on life. And to be honest, I don't know what I was thinking here. This move violates all the principles I knew so well. It goes to show you that you can take nothing for granted in the endgame. A long, beautiful struggle can be ruined by a single slip. And often when you're closest to the win, the stakes are highest in every direction. You can never take this for granted in chess, because losing your edge is fatal. h5 compromises my pawn structure. For one thing, if he plays the move h4, his 1 pawn is locking down my 2 pawns. Obviously, I evaluated that he couldn't do that, and I was wrong. I should have played the simple move king f7, and I'd be able to win. But after h5, I want you to think about the psychology of this game. I have huge confidence, as we've seen, perhaps a little bit too much confidence. And my opponent respects me a lot as a player. I've been completely controlling this game from the very beginning. I traded down material, I took an advantage in the endgame, I won a pawn. I traded by force into this king and pawn endgame, I played the move h5. So, to be honest with you, in terms of our psychological moment, we both thought that I was winning. So when I made the move h5, he didn't recognize the chance that I'd given him. He played king f4. He can't run to the queen side, because I'll start to advance my king side pawns. He doesn't have time. For example, if king d5, I can make the move even king f7, and then king c6. Now I can always start to advance. g5, king b6, g4, king takes a6, h4, king b5, g3. I'm going to make a queen before his king can get back, or before he can make a queen with his pawn. This is winning for me. He played king f4, king f7, king g5. You see, by playing h5, I've given him this hole in my pawn structure, which lets him lock down my progress. King g7, we both had calculated this far. He plays king f4. King f6, h4. This was the critical position. When I played the move h5 here, I evaluated that this position would be winning for me. I thought after g5 check, h takes g5, king g6. He's in this position that's called zugzwang. Anywhere he moves his king, I can take the g5 pawn. If he stalls for a minute by playing a4, then I play a5. Once again, zugzwang. If his king moves this way, I take the pawn, and then he can't stop my h-pawn. If he plays king e4, I play king g4. I'm shouldering his king away. King e3, what should black play here? Exactly, king g3. King g3, shoulder the king away. King e2, what again? Yes, king g2, shoulder the king away. And next, the pawn just runs up the board. White can't stop it. My opponent here played a4, a5, and he actually played king e5. A terrible decision, which, to be honest with you, came about because of my confidence. I had so much confidence in the board that he trusted me. King g3 I knew was completely winning for me, and he knew that I was right. But the truth is that we were both wrong. Let's take a look at why. If king g3, king takes g5, black should play the move king h3. And now the idea is that I thought, and he thought, he trusted me, that I could run over to the queenside, take that pawn, while he'd have to deal with my kingside pawn. I would take his queenside pawn, run up my king up to b2, and just escort my pawn up the board. No problem. That looks winning, right? We'll take some time and calculate it out. Do you think I'm right? This is one of those moments where you have to know the position. It's very important to have an understanding of certain essential endgame positions. Let's take a look. If I play king f5, king h4, king e4, king takes h5, king d4, this position looks completely winning for black, because I'm much closer to the queenside than he is. The key is, though, that if he understands if he gets to the c1 square with his king in time, he can draw. Then he can know he can save the game. King g4, king c4, king f3, king b3, king e2, king takes a4, king d2, king b3, and now, in this position, if it were my move with black, I could play king b2. The white king would be shouldered away, and I can win the game. But here white has the very strong move king c1. This is an endgame. There are hidden resources everywhere. You see his point? But one thing you have to know that in king and pawn endgames with a rook pawn, if the defending king can reach the corner, it is a draw. Always. In other words, if we get to this position, then white can draw, because if it's my move here, if I play a2, it's stalemate. So if you go back to this position, his king wants to get to the a1 square. That's what we call a theoretical draw, meaning it's part of chess theory. People know that position's a draw. So I have to stop it by playing king a2. I cannot let his king get to the corner. You see how white can draw this game now? He plays the move king c2, trapping my king on the a file. If I play king a1, then of course he can just play king b3 and take the pawn. So he has to move his pawn up the board. If he plays king a3, what does white play? Exactly, king b1, you head for the corner, and you draw. After a4, now what should white play? King c1, piece of cake, no problem. Now, if black plays king b3, then you go to the corner. We know that's a draw. If black plays king a1, you just go back to c2, no problem. So black plays a3, king c2. The point is that the white king can move back and forth, king c1, king c2, king c1, king c2. If white plays king a1, then king c1, king a2, king c2, king a1, king c1. It's a draw. The second that black plays a2, white just plays king c2, and what is this? Stalemate. Actually, black is up material and is stalemated. The black king can't move anywhere. There's no pawn moves. It's a draw. So in fact, an extension of the theoretical draw of the white king getting to the corner is that if the white king gets to the c1 square, it's also a draw. I didn't know that. My opponent didn't know that. Neither one of us found it in the game. And so if you go back to this position, he played king e5. King g3 could have forced a draw. After king e5, I simply played king takes g5, and it's all over. He played king d5. Remember, if he plays king e4, I just shoulder him away. King d5, what should I play here? Exactly, h4. King c5, h3, king b5, h2. King takes a5. I make a queen, and I win the game. No problem. In this particular position, if he plays king b6, I just bring my queen to the corner, and then I bring my king into the game. There's nothing that white can do. And this would be checkmate. In this endgame, I have the black pieces, and my opponent is actually David Arnett again. Remember the kid who beat me in that last round of the first national championships? Well, this game was played a few months later. That one was in May of 1985. This game was in March of '86, before the Jeff Sauer game. At this point, actually, Dave and I had become best friends. I moved to a school, Dalton School, in New York City, and he and I were the top two players on the team. We were hanging out together, playing sports. In this game, we were matched up in a tournament. I had the black pieces. I have a slightly better endgame, and I want you to see how I convert it. I was very comfortable in this kind of position. So let me break this position down for you for a minute. I have two bishops, which is very good on an open board. My bishop is eyeing his knight on c3. His bishop on e4 is guarding his rook on c2. Tactically, your alarm bells should be ringing here. Maybe I have something. You see, his pawn on e3 is unguarded. I played the very strong move, rook e8. You see my threat here? If it's black's move, what would you do? Remove the defender. Very good. His knight on c3 is guarding his bishop on e4, so if I take the knight, I win the bishop. The idea of rook e8 is that his bishop will have to move, because indirectly I'm attacking it. And when his bishop moves, it opens up my attack on the e3 pawn. This is actually a skewer. I'm attacking a weaker pawn through a stronger bishop. After rook e8, he played bishop c6, and what did I play? Exactly. Rook takes e3. Very good. I'm up a pawn. I've got two bishops, and I'm up a pawn. Now, we've already learned in the endgame we have to keep focused, present. Don't make any mistakes. Don't take the endgame for granted. Keep on maximizing your position. Stop the opponent's counterplay. Trade down because we're up material. These are the principles we have to have in mind. Dave played knight d5. What would you do now? I have to move my rook because it's threatened, right? Think about the principle of trading. When we're ahead in material like I am now, we want to trade down. So what's the most principled decision? This is the idea I want you to explore mostly in this endgame. Principles. Playing by the principles. Here, my rook's attacked. I have to defend it. I also want to trade down. Put those themes together. What's the best move? Rook e2, exactly. If the white rook moves, I take the a2 pawn. He has to trade down. I've simplified a little bit. An excellent way to convert the advantage when I'm up material. Rook takes e2, bishop takes e2. Now he played king f2. Okay, our bishop is threatened, we have to move it. What should I do? This is easy, a natural move, bishop c4, getting out of the way with tempo, attacking a pawn. He defends it, knight b4. Now remove the defender. His knight on b4 is defending his pawn on a2. Kick it out of the way. I played a5. If the knight moves, I take the pawn on a2. And now Dave played bishop d5. So in fact, the move a5 forced bishop d5, which traded down once more. You see how I'm converting my advantage? Trading material constantly. I played bishop takes d5, knight takes d5. Now look at the pawn structure. I have a dark squared bishop, so I want to lock his pawns on dark squares. I also want to activate my king. These are the principles. Put those principles together, find the best move. What should black play? Okay, this is an attempt to get my pawn off of the dark square, but it's not a very good decision here, because this pawn could actually become a big weakness. Keep in mind, a pawn that's on the dark square on this side of the board can be defended by my bishop. Exactly, my best move is f5. The pawn on a5 is fine where it is. Now I've pinned down his pawn on g3 to a dark square, and his pawn on h2 is also in a dark square. I've also opened up the room for my king to come into the center. King f7 to e6. This is excellent. Here he played knight f4, and I played king f7, bringing the king into the game. Activity. Notice the power of this bishop. If he ever attacks my pawn on a5, in just one move, I can defend it. It can move all the way from the king's side to all the way on the queen's side. Again, remember the theme. If we have an endgame with pawns on both sides of the board, a bishop is a little bit stronger than a knight. He played h4. And now I played bishop h6. Basically, I guess I was testing him here. Will he move the knight? Will he not? If he plays something like knight d5, the game goes on, no problem. I'd continue to activate my king. King e6, bring it into the struggle. Dave played a4. Black to play here. What would you do? Okay, if your instinct was not to take the knight, I can't really blame you. I've told you that a bishop is a little bit better than a knight in this kind of endgame where pawns are on both sides of the board. The competing principle is that you want to trade down, simplify, when you're up material. In this position, the king and pawn endgame is winning by force. I played bishop takes f4, simplifying once again. G takes f4, king e6. Dave has to bring his king in, king e3, and I play king d5, a dominant kingside position. Dave played king d3, black to move. What was my idea here? Here Dave is in a position, once again, of zugzwang. Anywhere he moves his king will allow me in. In this situation, I can't get into c4 or d4 or e4. So if it's my move, if I have to move my king, he'll move his king. If I have to move my king, he'll move his king. So if, for example, this was the position, a small change, but a critical detail, this would actually be a draw. If I have to move my king, he moves his. I have no way to get in. Back and forth. Back and forth. He shoulders me away. The key in this situation is that it's my move. All I have to do is waste a move to gain the opposition. When you finish this course, I strongly recommend that you turn to my endgame course, where I discuss the opposition in great depth. In this case, I'll define it very simply. When two kings are horizontally opposing one another with one square in between, the person whose move it is not has the opposition. So in this situation, if it's his move, if he moves his king, I can enter. If he moves his king this way, I can enter. I have the opposition. If it's my move, I move and he shoulders me away. I move and he shoulders me away. I move and he can shoulder me away. He has the opposition. The key idea when your opponent has the opposition is to waste a move. And here, I'm the only one who can waste a move, which is why this endgame is winning. The winning move here is very simple. Take a moment, put everything I've just told you together, and figure out how black can win the game. H6, exactly. A simple pawn move, losing time, and winning the game. White has to move king c3 or king e3. If he plays c3, I can make a choice. I can either play king e4, jumping in and taking that pawn, or I can play king c5. He would have to play king b3, king d4, shouldering him away. He plays king a3, I play king c3, shouldering him away once again, and then I just get this pawn. Once I win this pawn, my idea is to run my king to the king side, let him take my queenside pawn, I get this pawn, I can win the other pawn, and I just make queens, no problem. Another option would have been king e4. Let's calculate that out. After king e4, king takes f4, king b5. Now what should I do? Right, I just move my king out of the way. He takes this pawn, and then let's calculate the race. I queen first. He comes down. And now it's my move. No problem. In this situation, I can just defend the queening square. I can blockade with my queen if I want to. I can even give up my queen for this pawn take his remaining pawn with my king, and make a new queen, completely winning. So in this kind of position, the simplest move, h6, wins the game, because he's paralyzed. He's in Zugzwang. Dave played king e3, I played king c4, and he resigned. There's nothing he can do. I can take the a4 pawn now, and black wins the game. The simplicity of this endgame technique is very important to understand. Every move I made was governed by a principle. Trading down, the skewer, removing the defender, activate my king, paralyze his pawns on the same color square as my bishop, trade down again, activate my king further, Zugzwang.